Okay, hello everyone. I'm Melanie DeVoe. I'm the Director of the Office of Customer Education and Outreach here at the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. And I would like to welcome each and every one of you to the International Organization of Securities Commission's World Investor Week. We have a two-part panel discussion for you today focused on relationship confidence scams, referred to by the operators as pig butchering. These devastating frauds are costing Americans billions of dollars. Just to give you a preview of what you're about to experience. First, we have University of Texas Professor John Griffin, who will discuss the findings of his recent paper, Live from Austin, where they have a viewing crew. Then we will have a panel of federal regulators from the Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Investigations, Office of Foreign Assets Control, and the CFTC, who will discuss this growing fraud and how you can detect it. At the end of the discussion, we will leave each and every one of you with a mission to spread the word. Knowledge is power. Before I turn the mic over to Lillian Mills, the McCombs Business School Dean at the University of Texas at Austin, I have to give a government disclaimer and a notice. First, the views I'm about to share are my own and not those of anyone else at the CFTC. Second, Professor Griffin will present the findings of his report. The CFTC has not independently verified these findings, and the views presented by participants are not necessarily the views of the CFTC or the federal government, and no part of the presentation should be construed as an endorsement of any person or entity. That is a mouthful. Sorry about that. I would also like to notify you that the first part of the panel will be recorded. Once the professor is done speaking, he will open up the floor to a brief question and answer period. Now, I'm pleased to turn the presentation over to Dean Mills, live from Austin, Texas.
Well, thank you so much, Melanie DeVoe, who is one of our graduates from 1998, the Texas College of Law. We're very proud of her. So good afternoon to the East Coast people. I'm Lillian Mills, Dean at the McCombs School of Business. Welcome, those of you here in Austin, in Washington, D.C., and the hundreds of people joining us virtually to listen to the research of our McCombs finance professor, John Griffin. At McCombs, we believe business research should extend way beyond the classroom and boardroom to address critical real-world challenges. And I am proud that Professor Griffin is my colleague and my friend because he exemplifies this commitment to protecting vulnerable individuals and communities worldwide. We're honored that his work is being included in your World Investor Week in 2024. John Griffin is one of the world's leading forensic finance experts. He holds the James A. Elkins Centennial Chair in Finance, and his groundbreaking work has exposed financial fraud featured in over 800 news outlets worldwide, including the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. As both an acclaimed academic and the founder of Integra Research Group, he has worked closely with the SEC and other regulatory agencies to investigate and expose financial fraud. His recent expertise today about cryptocurrency-related fraud makes him uniquely qualified to address the critical issue of pig butchering scams. Please join me in welcoming Professor Griffin.
Okay. Thank you so much for the overly kind introduction, Dean Mills. That was very generous. And thanks for the CFTC for sponsoring this event, and thank all of you for coming and caring enough about this topic. I want to give a special shout out to my co-author, Kevin May. The professors always get all the praise, but the PhD students always get all the work. And in Kevin's case, it's particularly true. He's done an amazing job on this project, dedicated over a year of his life to this. very careful, very hard work that he's done on this project, and he's done an amazing job. So I also want to thank those at Integra FEC that have helped with the research behind the project and the tracing tool that allowed us to trace some of these scams. So how does this scam work? So yeah, what is pig butchering? Well, it could begin with a friendly outreach like this. This is actually a text message that I've received, and I received these random text messages quite frequently. When I poll students, they also often receive these as well. So I imagine you receive random text messages, and the goal of those is to move the conversation to WhatsApp or some other kind of social media platform. They may reach out to you on a social media platform. The goal of that is just to establish a friendship, a relationship. And those relationships can often go on for months without talking about investments. But at some point in time, it's time to drop in the fact that they're having a beautiful salad with lobster or crab on top. And, you know, things are going well for them, and they would like your life to go better too. What are your hopes and dreams? There's a huge amount of psychology that goes into this, even psychological manuals written on this. And they often prey on people that are going through tough times, divorced, people that are lonely, people even with cancer. And there's a kind of a myth that it only targets old people, but there's also middle-aged folks that fall prey to this, even younger folks. And it also is a myth that it's just unsophisticated players, but oftentimes people with advanced degrees and very sophisticated in their fields fall prey to this because they are very sophisticated in the way they go about these scams. And not all of these also are romance-based. They're very morphing in the way they go about this. Well, the end goal for this is to get you to move your money to a crypto platform. And we'll start with something small to build trust, and the crypto investment will do well. And after a time, you will be encouraged to actually bring some of your gains back. At that point in time, you're building trust that, in fact, this is a real platform, that you're able to bring this money back. And that is encouraged such that then you'll go in for the real kill here. And those gains can often rack up over time. They have very sophisticated ways that they coach you into getting all of your money out of your retirement savings, out of your mortgage, your second mortgage on your home, and so forth, all with a purpose to put it on the platform. At the time, though, what you don't know is that platform to the left is actually a fake platform, and your money was already taken. But at the end, to get your money off the platform, it's encouraged that you have to pay the tax. And at that point, they're trying to liquidate everything you have. Many people actually get money from friends and family at this point to pay their tax. Now, as dark as that scheme is from the front side and the investor side, it's actually even darker on the back side. Here is an area in Myanmar that was in 2019 was just on the border and was just a vacant farm field. And over time, though, by 2013, there's this huge compound being built. Unfortunately, this compound is not alone. There are many compounds like this spread throughout Southeast Asia, as well as in Cambodia, Laos. How will they get their victims? They'll actually encourage their victims. People will come in to fly into Bangkok thinking they're getting a nice tech job, and then will be bused to one of these locations where their passport's taken, they're locked up, and if they try to escape, will be beaten or killed. So how does this scam work? What can we do? Well, the motivation for our study is that illicit finance is the lifeblood of organized crime. Can we understand these criminal flows? Now, for better or for worse, these criminals use cryptocurrencies. We're going to see why they use cryptocurrencies to move the funds. And because they use cryptocurrencies, it allows us to examine the funds and where they go and how they flow through the system. We can ask where the capital enters, where the capital exits the system. We can use tracing algorithms to follow the capital to stopping points. And those stopping points are typically deposit addresses on major crypto exchanges. The reason for that is even though crypto was developed to be this decentralized currency, it's still the case that people want dollars. They want fiat currencies, and so they need exit points in hard currency. We will then examine the nature of these payments and the scope of the inflows to these deposit addresses over time. The whole goal of our study is to understand more about this, not just for intellectual curiosity, but to learn about what can be done to stop this. And we have practical implications that fall out of our results. So here is an example of a node coming out of Coinbase. The red triangle is a reported address that came out of Coinbase. Now, unfortunately, this is not just a random story. This is a story of an individual that was a law enforcement officer, formerly in law enforcement, that lost $65,000, their entire life savings through this crypto scam. And this is one of their payments that went out to a node here. Now, this looked like a fake exchange to them, but in fact, this node was controlled by the criminals. They moved it to another node, and from there, they moved it to TokenLawn. Reason why they moved it to TokenLawn is that most tracing algorithms would stop at TokenLawn, and also that they can convert the crypto from USDC into their favorite cryptocurrency, Tether. The Tether, the green flows coming back to the node. And in fact, if you look just a step out from there, you see that there's a whole bunch of nodes actually following the same pattern, following to this node, moving the money to TokenLawn, and then transfers throughout the network. Then where does the capital go? It primarily flows to Binance and OKX, two exchanges that primarily operate out of Southeast Asia. Now, that was just for a small sample. Now we take a larger sample of over 3,000 addresses and we map out the cryptocurrency network. Now, because it's so large, we can only show you a 3% sample, but you can get the idea from the 3% sample. The light colors, the light green colors, represent flows coming out of Western-based crypto exchanges. And what you see is that there's a lot of flows coming out of Crypto.com, Coinbase, and even Binance, smaller payments, and they're moving to these nodes. From there, they're moved around the network in a series of obfuscation techniques, just basic moving the crypto around, making it harder to trace. And from there, they move it to TokenLawn, again, where most of the tracing algorithms stop. Out of TokenLawn, they swap it into Tether. The money moves back to the network. They do some more transactions. And guess what? They move them out to these crypto exchanges. The large black nodes representing nodes that are receiving over $1 million a piece on these crypto exchanges. So there's many of these black large nodes for Binance, OKX, and to a lesser extent, Huobi. These are exchanges that are subverting anti-money laundering laws and where the capital is exiting the system, most likely to move into hard currency. Now, what are the key findings of our study? I'm going to show this, and I'll show a little more flavor for what we're doing. Well, interesting enough, we find that the funds actually follow similar patterns. There are more sophisticated obfuscation techniques out there in crypto. They're using fairly basic ones, probably because the more sophisticated ones cost more money. And they can move the money all the way from Western-based exchanges to Eastern-based exchanges for 87 basis points, less than a half of a credit card transaction fee. So this is an extremely efficient way for them to move funds and relatively hard to money to be seized. They used a series of obfuscation techniques, including multiple transfers, moving the money around, recirculating the flows, some dusting transactions, but overall, again, not the most sophisticated techniques. They move the money through this exchange, often through TokenLawn, but also occasionally through Uniswap, where they obscure these transactions. These, once they move these through the swap, they're swapped commonly into Tether, where 84% of the transactions within the network. Why do the crypto criminals like Tether? We don't know exactly, but perhaps because it's a stable coin, it's tied to the dollar, it makes it easy for the profits to be split. The inducement payments is another common feature, that this network that we're finding of all these addresses are sending payments back to these centralized exchanges like Coinbase and Crypto.com, over 15,000 transactions each. And what those inducement payments are doing is they're telling the investors at Crypto.com and Coinbase that you can trust us, we're going to send your money back. These are chances where these exchanges could detect these payments, but seemingly aren't doing so. And overall, we're finding in the deposit addresses that we trace across the blockchain that are going to these exchanges, primarily the ones in Southeast Asia, we're finding over $75 billion flowing into those exchanges through the network. The largest exchanges, again, are Binance, OKX, and Huobi. And we're finding when we trace backwards to Western-based exchanges, we're finding over $15 billion coming out of these Western-based exchanges flowing. Those are funds likely from victims that are flowing into the network. Interesting enough, China cracked down on crypto in 2021. What happened? Within months of this activity happening, the gangs shifted towards targeting Asian victims to targeting Western victims. And they did so very effectively. So what's a key punchline of our paper? I'll talk about implications at the end. But the implication is, even though crypto was set up to be this decentralized currency, it's still running as a centralized network. These are centralized exchanges that purport to conform to some security laws, anti-money laundering laws, and so forth. So there is hope to clamping down on these entry points and exit points through the system. How do we go about this? Well, I'm not going to have time to go through everything here, but I'll show you the snippets of some key pieces. We're going to start with some deposit addresses. These are victim addresses. These addresses here are in ETH on the Ethereum network. And we're going to find over 3,000 addresses. And you can see that some of these addresses are receiving up to over $1 million into each of these nodes. And we also look at Bitcoin addresses and Tron addresses. But the curious thing is that most of the activity is not coming from Bitcoin anymore. Most of the activity is on the Ethereum network, probably because Bitcoin is easier to trace and easier to follow. And some of the new activity is moving to Tron, but it's still fairly small compared to what's happening on the Ethereum network. So overall, what we're going to do is we're going to look at these victim addresses, look at when they come out of these centralized exchanges, such as crypto.com here. We're going to take these nodes, and our methodology is going to trace these nodes across the blockchain until they reach a stopping point where they're likely swapped into another crypto. In this case, the nodes are going to go to, a lot of times they go through token lawn, and from token lawn, they're switched back to the network, and then we trace those to deposit addresses. Now, interesting enough, on the blockchain, deposit addresses are kind of akin to bank account numbers. So they're out there, and once you know the bank account number, you can actually look at related bank account numbers that the criminal network interacts with, and we'll do a technique called deposit address clustering to get a size for what the scope of this activity might be. Now, how does this work? Well, the reason they're going here is because likely they want to get into hard currencies. They want to get in cash. They cannot, even though you've heard about buying pizza with Bitcoin on the internet, it's relatively rare. You can't really buy many things other than illegal goods. So the associated addresses, how does this work? Well, over time, starting in 2000, we find that these flows are accumulating. The black bar here is Binance. The blue is for Huobi, and then OKX in yellow. And we're finding that these flows accumulate over time. And they continue accumulating over our sample period. You see most of those money moving through these deposit addresses. And that's where the $75 billion come from. If we have time, I'll unpack that. That does not necessarily mean they're all victims, the victim funds, but those are funds, those are deposit addresses that have taken in victim funds. And there's likely other deposit addresses that we're not capturing through our network as well. So on net, we're fairly conservative in our assumptions. We use cumulative tracing here. We trace back from these deposit addresses to see where the fund's coming from. And one of the interesting things we find is that they're sending small payments back to exchanges like Coinbase and Crypto.com. Sometimes small payments of $100 up to $1,000, maybe even $5,000, but most of the time below $1,000, sending them back to these exchanges. And these patterns, they're sending multiple transactions, sometimes interacting more than 100 times, even 200 times with these exchanges. And what those small transactions are, payments, they fit the classic pattern of inducement payments, where they're inducing their victims to build trust that, in fact, this is not an obscure exchange, this is a real exchange. And those trust-building payments continue over our period. And they're present not just on Coinbase, but on Crypto.com, Binance, and many other exchanges as well. Now, as I mentioned previously, China cracked down on crypto in 2001. What we see prior to that is a pattern of growing activity. The black nodes represent activity happening at Asian-based exchanges. And you can see that that activity is growing through time, and that activity is during Chinese business hours. What happened, though, after China cracked down on crypto is the activity shifted to US-based business hours, and the activity shifted more towards Western-based exchanges where the flows were going out of. So there's many more results in our paper, but what of our findings can inform policy? Well, we think, first of all, the crypto facilitates this activity because it's a very cheap source to move money, and there's generally loose regulation in this. Think about all the anti-money laundering laws that are developed and the checks and balances around our traditional banking system, and we developed those set of infrastructure for a reason, to stop criminals. Now we have a new set of infrastructure. Maybe the laws still apply, but it's kind of unsure how things are being applied. So we're finding that these large exchanges are common exit points. We're finding $75 billion associated with these criminal coming out through these exit points. And those centralized exchanges do purport to conform to some sort of international law. Tether is the preferred cryptocurrency, 84% of transactions. Things are moving out through token lawn. That's providing liquidity to criminals. Also on Uniswap, there's US-based, Western-based hedge funds that are out there making liquidity. No, you're not. You're not making liquidity. You're providing capital to criminals. You're facilitating money laundering. That's why they're giving you 10 basis points, not for having a happy smiley face. So the consistent organized patterns over time indicate that they're not too concerned about detection, okay? These are also indicate that they're not one-off crimes, that international law enforcement needs a coherent framework. We can't put this onto the Westlake PD to solve the problem. US and Western-based exchanges, they are common entry points. And the fact that these payments are moving to them constantly indicates that they're not monitoring these very closely. So, practical policy suggestions. We can have, first of all, we should have more prosecution of these crypto exchanges because they are engaged in money laundering. That will force them to develop a more robust framework in terms of not just KYC procedures, but also KYT, know your transaction, know where your transactions are coming from. This is the same framework that we use in our banking system. Also, we should ask, who are the banks that are dealing with Binance, Huobi, and OKX that are taking large amounts of capital out and funneling them in Southeast Asia? Where is that going? Who are the banks? We need substantially more resources to do this. This is as we can see, the scale is huge, and we need to devote in Congress, and otherwise we need to devote much more in the way of resources and task force to focus on this. Maybe not just one task force, but to approach this problem from several different angles. Also, I believe we need a more coordinated system, quicker asset freezes, and more consolidated data. Western exchanges could actually insure their customers if they lost money. If they had to insure their customer funds, they might do more to protect their customers. And last but not least, I do think increased public awareness can really help this. There are already many grassroots initiatives. I want to give a shout out to Aaron West, Operation Shamrock, International Justice Mission, many other nonprofits, but also just individuals, grassroots individuals caring about this cause. I appreciate you guys coming because I do think the more people care about this issue, the more we bring awareness to this issue, that we can actually stop this. If you think about it, it is one of the most horrific crimes that we've seen in our lifetime. But I think our paper shows it's actually not hopeless, that it can be stopped. And if we have the will, well, we will have the way. So thank you so much. Let me take a few questions from the audience. Yes.
Can you go into a little more detail on the steps that go into cashing in the crypto? Like the last part of the step when they convert it into actual cash?
Yeah, cashing in or cashing out? Like
Cashing in, like when they get cash out of the scam, essentially.
yeah, so there's the cash in and the cash out. The cash in part is that when people, because U.S. exchanges like Crypto.com, because they are accepted, people can wire money from their bank account and set up account at that place, right? So if you were to wire money to some Southeast Asia, people would, that would immediately be flagged by your bank account. But if you wire it to Crypto.com, that's an accepted point. So that's the entry point. On the exit point and the cash out part, it is a little, we don't have a lot of research in terms of how that is done. It could be more informal money laundering services, but what we do know is these centralized exchanges deal with a lot of hard currency and people swapping hard currency into crypto and in and out of these exchanges. So that's where most of the in and out between currency, dollars, and crypto occurs is on these exchanges. And so that's why they have to do it here and not on obscure swapping points, because there's so much capital coming in that they have to deal, they have to move it through large places.
So I don't know a lot about scamming and money laundering, but I'm curious if you have any context into how big this is compared to scams that are operated not off of not on crypto exchanges. So, gift card scams that are very similar, things like that, just on an impact size.
Yeah, we tried to find, part of the problem is all scams are hard to measure, and only some estimates put that only 3% of scams are reported. So if you looked at this scam in terms of just victim reported addresses, you would actually get a fairly small number. That's the advantage of our tracing methodology, is that we can trace to these exit points. And then once we tag the exit points, we can see how much capital is coming in. There has been some work on traditional things. And we, from those estimates, I think in general, our numbers are, the amount of money exiting through these scams is quite large relative to the magnitude in these other more traditional scams.
Yeah, question in Washington.
These perpetrators tend to target individuals that are vulnerable in some way. Do you know how they go about targeting individuals?
I think it's just random cold outreach at first, but if people that respond, they develop the relationships. There's whole documentaries made about this, and one of the interesting things is there's actually psychology manuals that are set to train people in the psychology of how to develop friendships, find out where their needs are, where their wants are, and actually poke at those weak spots. Yeah.
Hello?
Hello.
Should I go ahead?
Can you hear me?
I think they may want to cut us off on the web. Yeah. Yes, we can hear you. Yeah. Question.
Thanks. Great presentation. I have a quick question on, so if you are able to identify these nodes that are where the money is coming in and out of, are these, and then to exchanges, are these choke points that can be, I guess the answer is yes, but, are these choke points that can be used to sort of stop this and sort of freeze the money and return, not only return funds, but figure out where the crime, who the perpetrators are, just because we know where their sort of choke points are when they come in and out of exchanges? How can we use that information to our advantage?
Yes, it's a good point. One of the challenges here is that they do switch out those accounts. So after an account's been used for a while, they may switch out to a new account. But one of the surprising things about our research is some of these accounts they're keeping open for quite some time. So that means they're not too concerned. They may be taking the money in and then cashing out and not having a lot of money sitting there in the account. But the fact that the accounts are open for so long means they're operating with relatively little fear of law enforcement closing those accounts or exchanges closing those accounts down. So it does indicate much more can be done. It may be kind of a whack-a-mole problem, But the more difficult, the more costly you make them, the more funds you seize, the less the more they're going to have to spend effort on that, and less on the 87 basis points that they're currently mostly transacting on chain, at least.
What is it about token loan that makes it hard to track wallet addresses post when they send money there? Like, what are they doing differently at token loan?
There's absolutely nothing they're doing differently at token loan. It seems like maybe we don't know exactly why. Maybe there's some kind of relationship where they get really low fees at token loan. Maybe one of the criminals has an equity stake in it. They're getting just a kickback or something. I have no idea why it hasn't been closed down. It's been a feature of this. It's just actually a small. It's actually just really a small exchange that's specializing in this. We're finding a large fraction of their flows are actually related to this activity. Yes.
Yes, sir. So you had mentioned quickly that there might be an opportunity for like domestic users to have some type of insurance on these assets as time moves on. Would that then open up an opportunity for fraud, like fraudulent reporting of, moved assets?
Yeah, it could open up such an opportunity, but I do think if our evidence shows that these exchanges could be monitoring the activity. If we can monitor it, they could monitor it. They're choosing not to. It's a cost center for them. If they had to insure people's accounts, they might spend more evidence of that. Yes, people might try to commit fraud against them, but they could also investigate those things. So the exit point moving through Binance is an exchange that has paid penalties, by the way, to the Department of Justice for this. But our research shows even after they pay the penalties to the Department of Justice, they're still moving many funds through the exchange. So we have no idea why that is.
So I am mostly knowledgeable about this through socialcatfish.com. If anyone's seen the YouTube channel, it's quite fascinating from a psychological standpoint of how victims come to fall prey to these scams. I've always seen Nigeria as the focal point, so I'm surprised to see that it's Southeast Asian gangs. So I'm just curious to see where Nigeria falls into this. And then also whether there's any things that are going on with respect to IP addresses being linked within the crypto in order to find the perpetrators, and how those two dovetail, the crypto accounts and the IP addresses, to see how to claw this back, because I know it's very difficult.
Yeah, those are great questions. We have obtained through a nonprofit that gave us the address of some people that were actually trafficked, and those trafficked victims were in the network. So most of what we're capturing is likely due to those gangs in Southeast Asia. There is this activity going on in Lagos, Nigeria. Some estimates over 100,000 people involved in scamming there. Those scams seem to be a little different in nature, and perhaps not the major thing that's going on with our data. Yes, it's huge. This is even bigger, though, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I was scammed once. I lost like about $200. That's not a big amount, but the method they took was pretty simple. It's just a phishing website. So it's a wrong website, but I put my crypto address and key into that one, and they grabbed my money. So after that, I discovered on Ethereum, there's actually a website you can report those like addresses, because you can always know who is transferring your money to what address. So there will be a list of addresses that was reported by a lot of people. But I was always thinking, is there a way we can form a network of those malicious addresses and to see whether they are organized and what's their because I believe they're not random. There might be an organization behind everything happening.
Yeah.
Right. So if we can trace their organization, how they swap money among addresses, and how they link to real world activities. Like I know North Korea is having some, like they have organizations that is targeting on Western, and they are trying to grab money into their organization and do some other activities. So if we can identify them as an organization and do something about that, is that part of what the study could help?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. I know it takes lots of courage to admit that. I think a lot of people reach out to us. There's so many people that have lost money through this. Phishing is actually something that's a little different from our analysis. We actually compare and contrast phishing to this in a part of the paper. And the way they go about phishing is probably a different criminal organization, or at least different methods that are used. But I do hear your point. We use some of those databases online, but there should be much more widespread reporting and sharing of these victim addresses. In fact, the vast majority of these victim addresses, I believe, are falling, even people that purport are falling into a black hole. And that is data and information that we could use to stop this. So I hear the spirit of your idea, and I think it's exactly right.
I don't know too much about this issue, but I heard or I recently read in the news that there were these two, young men from Miami who stole over $230 million from a victim in Washington, D.C. Could you speak on how, two people could pull off something like that?
Thanks, Dylan. I'm not familiar with that particular scam. Usually what we're finding is these scams are different in nature than some of the other investment scams. There are a lot of investment scams being run out of the U.S. and unfortunately, Ponzi schemes and investment schemes. That's typically what's run out of the U.S. Run-of-the-mill Ponzi scheme, promoted and so forth. And these scams are really focused on the romance, friendship aspect of that and have less of that personal interaction. But unfortunately, there are many face-to-face scams, many scams on crypto, just raw investment scams, Ponzi schemes. And we're seeing many of those things unfold. It's sad, but there is, if you read about some investment scheme, I would say there's a really high chance it's actually a Ponzi scheme. You'll see that later they're shown to be a Ponzi.
And so, Professor Griffin, we really appreciate all of your presentation. It's fantastic. I do have one more question for you. I'm George Rada from the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. I'm the director of the Office of Technology Innovation. And so I've got one last question for you, and that is, what surprised you most about the findings from your report?
Yeah, great question. I think there were several things that surprised me, but probably the biggest thing was how simplistic they're engaged in this activity, because there is much more complicated things they could be doing to move funds. So at first that surprised me, but then after we studied it more, I understood the reason for that is this is the low-cost way. Why should they use those more complicated strategies if this is the low-cost way? I was also very surprised to see how much they preferred to move money into Tether. 84% of the transactions within the network. There's something very enticing about Tether. And I was also just surprised to see that even after Binance paid a large fine to the U.S. government, there's still funds being moved through Binance, even several months after they pay the fine. Perplexing to me. Thank you.
Great. That's very interesting. In fact, I saw a recent court case with the SEC and Coinbase where I believe that Coinbase will potentially not be selling Tether in the future, so that may change some of the dynamics, or it might cause the scam victims to be directed to other places other than Coinbase as a result of that that exchange. So again, thank you so much, Professor Griffin, for all your work. We've been, enjoyed reading your paper, and we appreciate your presentation